Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to our joint informational workshop, Paso Robles City Council, Downtown Parking Advisory Commission for Saturday, April 9th. And this is Mayor Steve Martin speaking. Before we get started with the meeting, I'd like to read the following. City has returned to hybrid public meetings pursuant to AB 361, which allows for a deviation from the teleconference rules required by the Ralph M. Brown Act. Residents now have the option to attend the meeting in person or to participate remotely. To participate remotely, residents can live stream the meeting at www.prcity.com/YouTube and call 805-865-7276 to provide public comment via phone. The phone line will open just prior to the start of the meeting and remain open throughout the meeting to ensure the opportunity to comment on each item heard by the council. Written public comments can be submitted via email to cityclerk@prcity.com after the agenda is posted and prior to 12 noon on the day prior to the special council meeting to be posted as an agenda item, an addenda rather, to the agenda. If submitting written comments in advance of the meeting, please note the agenda item by number or name. City council meetings will be live streamed during the meeting, also available to play later on YouTube by accessing the following link, www.prcity.com/YouTube. And with that, I will call the meeting to order and ask for a roll call of our City Council and our Parking Advisory Commission, please.
Councilmember Garcia.
Here.
Councilmember Gregory.
Here.
Councilmember Hammond.
Here.
Councilmember Strong.
Here.
Mayor Martin.
Here.
Commissioner Upkarian. Commissioner Anshin. Absent. And Commissioner Casillas. Absent. Commissioner Rausch.
Here.
Commissioner Talon.
Here.
Chairperson Fitzpatrick.
Here.
Very good. I would invite you now to stand as you're able. Join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, led today by Councilman Strong.
With me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And if we could have staff introductions, please, starting on my right.
Dave McHugh, IT Manager.
Melissa Boyer, City Clerk, joined by Shauna Howenstein, Civic Engagement Coordinator.
Ty Lewis, City Manager.
Kayla Davis, Police Mayor. Brian Brunel, Administrative Services Director. Assistant City Manager.
Thank you. Do we have any staff attending online today?
Elizabeth Hall, City Attorney.
City Attorney, anyone else? Very good, thank you. We move on now to public comment. Public comment for special meetings is limited to agenda items only, and an opportunity is provided for that agenda item. So we've already listed the options for participating either in person or telephonically. So when we do public comment today, because it is a special meeting, it will be just for the public issue that's on the agenda today. And our discussion issue is modification of paid parking rates. So if we could have a staff report, please.
Sorry.
Yes, Mr. Rausch.
As we have something I'd like to present.
Is it
Regarding.
It's on the topic today? Okay, so it'll be part of the discussion. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council and the Park Commission. I'm here today to present to you the financial review for the parking program. As you know, we've been talking about this for a while, and we've worked to put together a staff report along with a presentation for you today to discuss those options. Instead of me presenting it, Ms. Julie Dixon is going to present today, and so I'd like to call her up.
Thank you, Commander, and nice to see everybody here today. And I have the clicker. And so thank you again for those of you that know me. My name is Julie Dixon, and we've been helping support the city of Paso Robles basically since the onset of this parking program and talking about those next steps in managing the program moving forward. So one of the things that we thought we would do is just revisit some of the background and history so that when we have the conversation today, we can really go back to the intent of the program. When this program was first initiated, we knew that the primary challenge was employees parking in the downtown core, and basically occupying the spaces throughout the day and basically not providing parking availability for our guests and our visitors. So that was really the intent. And so when the program initiated, it was really about making data-driven decisions. And many of you can recall 85% is basically that target of when you're near or at capacity, and it's when you need to make parking management changes. I think it's important to really talk about, when we talk about parking management in the downtown, is it was always intended that it was going to be an adaptable solution, and I think that that's the part that we can't forget. The fact that we're here today having this conversation is actually a good problem to have. It means that parking demand continues to increase. We have some statistics that we're going to share today that, people love Paso. They're coming to our downtown, and we really need to talk about how to mitigate and manage the curbside, so that when we really talk about managing demand, it really does come down to those occupancy rates. And one of the ways that you can manage occupancy rates does come down to the rate models and how much you basically charge per hour or putting time limitations. And so as we talk about some of the statistics today, I think it's really important when we come down to that baseline. When we started the program, we initiated really the first of its kind, what we called the customer value model, which was the 2 hours on street, where a customer needs to register and initiate their 2-hour parking session to park on street. And then we identified the employee parking program where they park in the perimeter locations. The intent was to have a sustainable program as a result of the cost neutrality with 5 years. There's been a couple of curveballs that we all experienced, one being the pandemic, which definitely hit us hard, but also the fact with the 2 hours free, which was not the initial initiation of what the program was supposed to be, that has definitely been proven through the statistics that the majority of our customers and visitors are enjoying the downtown within that 2 hours. But I think you'll see some of the impacts of that as we talk about sales tax revenue. So when you see the highlighted areas, it's important to understand that when we talk about the paid parking management area, these are the streets that are basically those that are managed through paid parking management. And I think it's important to highlight that it's the surrounding cores where you basically can park unlimited for free, including in the designated parking lots as well. And I was sharing today with the commander that in all the time that I've come to Paso, I've always parked on the perimeter and I've never actually paid for parking. And I think that that's something to really highlight, the fact that I literally parked 2 blocks off of the core and I've never paid once, and I've never had a challenge finding a parking space. And that's me, an out-of-towner who comes and visits. And I think that one of the things that I've also witnessed as I stayed on an opposite side of town today, the wayfinding has also improved dramatically over the last several years too, when it comes to breadcrumbing people to the downtown. So that when we talk about parking management, parking rates, how much the value of parking is, it's really important to identify the fact that you do have a very walkable downtown. I know during the summertime it does get hot, but the fact is you really can park 1 or 2 blocks off of the core and still find available parking resources. It's also important when we basically got back to the beginning of the program, when we updated the municipal codes, one of the things that we also did was identify the fact that this was about demand management. It was never about revenue generation. The ideal was to have a sustainable solution, but if there was a revenue upside, that money would be identified and reinvested into the downtown. And so that's something that when we do start to talk about the forecasts and the potential revenue upsides, that was always intended that if there was a benefit revenue, that it would go and get directed back into the downtown core and be able to be utilized for different things like lighting programs, flyers, banners, or other venues and opportunities like that. So when we talk about the program, we actually went out and did some sampling over this last several weeks to be able to demonstrate to you where your demand is. And when I mentioned that 85% number being the measure, you can see that you really are at that demand number when parking management decisions need to be made. And this is an important part of why we're here today. It's important to identify that today the model is not cost neutral, and that's important when we talk about making this evaluation moving forward. I think it's also important to highlight that while the council did authorize us to be able to hire additional parking enforcement resources, just like any business, it's been difficult to hire staff. And I know that there have been several attempts to bring personnel on, and it just has not been successful. So as a result of not having additional resources out there on the street, that inconsistency of enforcement is something that we know could also increase compliance as well when we talk about those revenue drivers. So we thought we'd share just a couple of the statistics. This is basically graphically the display of the numbers that were on the previous slide. That red dotted line basically indicating the fact of that's really where that 85% measure is. And so again, being at that number means that we need to start making decisions as to how to manage parking moving forward. We also thought it was important to share basically last summer's numbers from when we did the data collection to indicate, we're getting into kind of our peak season, and to demonstrate that everything is on target, to demonstrate that your demand is going to be where it was at, if not greater, and the fact that we need to definitely do something to mitigate the curbside. Important to also highlight is that through the statistics that have been gathered, the off-street parking locations are underutilized. I was very pleased to see some of the improvements that we've had in some of our parking lots, and that we've also identified the transit stop location where there's absolutely no utilization in that particular location either, but we do still have parking availability in your off-street lots. So when we also talk about the program, it was always about customer service, always about compliance, but I think we can all appreciate that ultimately citations do get issued, and you can see that it's just a fraction of the program, but this is also an important reason why consistent coverage is important. I can tell you a number of stories of some of our community members that, watch for the parking ambassadors to be coming down the street when they initiate their parking session. All factors like that again, we're trying to mitigate and avoid those and be able to have people park in those long-term locations, which I identified were readily available. So when we do talk about citation revenue, while we didn't include the citation revenue in the revenue forecast, I think it's important to identify with more enforcement, we get higher compliance, which also increases paid parking revenue and also has citation revenue as an upside as well. We don't target citation revenue because we don't like to talk about writing tickets. We like to talk about people following the rules, but there is revenue identified there, and it's important to identify too. That's the gross citation revenue numbers, and everyone needs to understand that there's fees associated with the distribution of those numbers, monies that go to the county, to the state, and other programs. So that's not necessarily bottom line revenue that the city receives. We thought there was a couple of other statistics that the group should hear about, which is the sales tax revenue. Thanks to the finance director for sharing these numbers. I know that the number is bold in the percentage change, but I think that that's also indicative of COVID from last year. But you can also see the steady gain for your sales tax revenues in the downtown. And this is something that many cities have modeled their programs after yours because of the fact that parking management has been demonstrative of having a positive effect on your sales tax revenue. And when we compared this to other areas of the city, your numbers again continue to grow in the downtown core. During your last council meeting, I was talked about the transient occupancy tax, and you can see that this year you're on track to exceed fiscal year 2021. And so we thought we'd share those numbers as well so everybody could have this for our reference. So when we talk about the next steps, I believe everyone is aware at the last Parking Advisory Commission, the team voted for $2 per hour. And so we basically included 3 options for discussion today. One of which would include a resident discount program, which basically would continue the 2 hours free for city residents. It's important to recognize there's an administrative aspect of that program. Residents would need to pre-register for the program and likely use their mobile app. There are some hardware and infrastructure opportunities that we could use at the equipment at the pay stations, but just to really simplify this process, it would be important that people would register for the program. We could also move to $1 per hour, which really brings you to that break-even point. Even with the resident discount, in a coming slide, you'll see the numbers rolled out so you can see the visual. And this is where we could attain program sustainability, and the hourly rates basically stay $1 per hour and could continue throughout that day. And then $2 per hour, which again could still generate revenue with the resident discount and could generate the most revenues for city improvements. We also included into this the opportunity for businesses to offer validations, which we still offer this today, which we offer discounted validations for our businesses. And this could also include the 3-hour validation for the movie theater. All of that was built into these various models. And so knowing that a lot of the graphics that we've showed in the past, there was a lot of numbers. So we thought we'd keep it really simple. and identify the annual forecasted revenue. And what we did is we basically created this graphic where you can see that with the $1 an hour, if residents paid, that would be your forecasted revenue at about $450,000. And if you did the $2 per hour and residents paid, we're at about $1.1 million. And then if you go down to that next tier, you can see that we can still have that break-even point that if you offered the residents free. But one of the things we also included in those two numbers was knowing that there would be an annual expense associated with the administration of a program like that. And none of these numbers include citation revenue because, again, those estimates and forecasts, we typically try not to tie that in because we want to be as conservative as we can to make sure that we're covering the costs of the program. And so just on the upside, again, with whichever decision you all make, if revenues are generated, some of the things that could come as a result of that, the flower baskets, the banners, the flyers, secure bike parking, lighting. And the one thing I know, this is a very popular conversation point about a parking garage in the downtown. It's very important that you have to manage your current parking assets in order to have an effective parking garage. And this is something that I think is really important to recognize, is that when you want people to park off street and park for the day, you want that to be the most convenient, affordable location, and making your on-street assets the premium and the priority. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to remind everybody of the streets where the program is today and the ample opportunity for free parking surrounding that. And with that, everyone is aware we have the parking at prcity.com email address to be able to continue to use that as a resource and a customer service opportunity. And with that, that is our presentation for today.
Thank you very much. So unless there's any more to be presented, the way we'll proceed with this is the way the council always proceeds, and we'll proceed with our commission in parallel today. And that is, right now, if we have questions regarding the presentation, this is the time to ask them, the time to make, as Mr. Roush has said, I've got an idea I want to present. That's going to come after public input because we want to make sure that the public has the opportunity to throw their ideas in the bin before we start solving problems for them. So at this point in time, I'll try to keep my head swiveling on a post here to see anybody, but if there are any questions regarding the presentation, now's the time to ask them. John.
Yeah, hi, Julie. What I'm looking for is the system that we have in place, the way to park. Is that possible to adjust the cost per hour based on time of day?
You definitely can. When you start to talk about changing rates based on dynamic pricing models, from a municipality perspective, it's how you educate and inform the public of what those rates are and trying to keep it as simple as possible. But your system absolutely can accommodate the various methods. You could also have time of year or peak season pricing, things like that as well, special event pricing, all of those factors. Your entire operation, whether it be the kiosks or the app, can accommodate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for, I think, to have a hybrid, so to speak, not just a flat $2 an hour all day long, every day, but maybe...
So real quick reminder, make sure if you've got red lights and green lights in your microphone is off when the red light is on, it's on when the green light is on, and if your microphone isn't pointed at you, it might as well be off. Thank you. Go ahead.
So that's what I was kind of wondering, if we can mold that into the program where we can adjust revenue based on time of day.
The main thing you want to focus on is predictability. Is because of the fact that your constituency coming downtown, you want to make sure that whether it be your residents or your guests, they basically know what they're going to get. And so it's really important from an equitability aspect as well, is making sure that folks know what their options are so that they can also trip plan accordingly. And so the system absolutely can accommodate that. I just really encourage a municipality like yourselves to make sure that you consider equitability when you're also talking about those rates. But tiered rates are definitely an option where many agencies, Sacramento being one of the best examples, where the first 1 or 2 hours are basically at a lower rate threshold, and then it basically escalates at a significant increase to like $2, $4, $5 an hour. And if you want to stay all day, it can be as high as $40 an hour to park on street. And those are definitely opportunities.
And that's all done through the system basically, and it just automatically calculates it to their credit card at the end of the day, so to speak.
So important, especially in parking from a transparency standpoint, when the person parks, they need to know what they're agreeing to. So whatever your rate threshold is, they're basically agreeing to it. I like to use the example, if you're driving into a popular high-rise downtown where you've got the flag wavers trying to get you to park into a parking garage and they're offering an early bird rate, that's you pulling into that garage knowing that you're agreeing to that payment term because as of 10 o'clock or noon that day, the rates skyrocket. And that's an important factor. When you pull into a facility, you're pulling in knowing what the rates are. It's like your mutually agreed upon, agreement with that operator. The same goes with your on-street, is that you wouldn't change or escalate your rates after the person is parked. They would come in knowing what the rates were going to be for that day. And typically an agency like yourselves would set your rate thresholds based on the demand and then let those rates ride for a quarter or a season or something like that. A program like San Francisco, they won't make rate changes more than basically every 90 days. And that's an important aspect of, because they have to communicate that messaging and let the numbers ride and then evaluate the data to determine what they do the next time.
How is that messaging typically done? On the signpost, or how is it?
Today, it's typically done through the equipment and through the apps, because what you try to do is keep the signage standardized so that you're not constantly having to go up there and relabel. And typically it's through communication, press release, messaging through downtown associations, and then through the apps and through the kiosks, so that when folks park, they basically know what they're going to get.
And we still have the opportunity where merchants can give tokens or some sort of a discount still, and how does that apply to this system? Does it automatically get done through the merchants or to the person who's parking?
Great question. So it's something that the individual merchants can make the choice of whether or not they want it to apply to the current session or whether or not they want it to apply to a future visit. So that's oftentimes one of the first decisions that have to be made. Usually the municipality will decide whether or not you want to provide those options, but oftentimes when you give that choice to the customer, sometimes they can offer it for your next visit. Here's a free token, like you mentioned, or here's the use code that you'll use either at the kiosk or on the app. But basically, if you park and you want it to apply to this current session, or I want to extend my session, they can still give you that user code. And they can either do it through an in-store app, or they can basically give the code to the customer and they can apply it as well.
I see. And our system can't handle that right now.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so I have several hands in the air. Reminder, it's portion of the question and answer exercise today. So Commissioner Kirkpatrick.
It's question, meaning no comments yet.
Correct.
Okay. My first question is the projection of the $270,000 that we could be earning from citations this year. What you said that there are expenses as well. So what's our net on that?
So with the fees associated, I would usually take about 40% off the top, just as a raw number. I think it's a good swag for you to have. So I think if you took about 40% off the top, that would basically give you a pretty round number as to what you could expect on the bottom line. And I will highlight too, I like to demonstrate that enforcement revenue is basically meant to be self-sustaining for the personnel that are in the field. It's one of the reasons why we typically don't account for those fees in the revenue forecast, because typically parking enforcement personnel pay for themselves. And that's one of the reasons why we try to kind of keep that number independent of the forecast.
Okay, so thank you. So roughly we're looking at about $150,000 if we are bringing in $270,000. Okay.
Roughly.
So then with this exact chart that you have up right now, can we see exact math on that? I think
we brought some backup material today, anticipating that you would have that. So this was one of the slides that we had in a previous presentation, and I know that there's a lot of data points on there. And so a couple of things that when we talk about the revenue forecast, there's several details that are built into this model, which include compliance and occupancy. And so what we've tried to basically do is tie in average occupancies based on what you're currently experiencing in the downtown. It's why the math doesn't just basically add up, one number over another, because we're basically incorporating your number of parking spaces, less potentially the short-term spaces that we've talked about. Then you add compliance to that as well, anticipating that if you had 100 parking spaces, and let's just say that consistently 70% of them were full, and then you apply a compliance factor of saying maybe only 50% of those cars actually paid and followed the rules. So that's where you see these numbers being very conservative to say, like, worst case scenario, if only these number of people parked and only these number of people actually paid for the program, that's where these numbers basically come out at. Does that make sense?
Sort of. Yes, it does make sense. It just sounds like compliance is a challenge. So how many citations have we issued year to date this year? And then how does that compare to last year?
Yep, I think I have that one on. Let me find we have a lot of support slides, so I want to make sure I get to this particular one. Forgive me. Let me go back. Say it again, and I'll do it here, Donna. We're pulling that number, and I think I have it on one of my slides as well. Forgive me as I hopefully don't make any motion sickness here. So right here you can see for the paid citations, and it's important to highlight this doesn't necessarily capture all the issued citations. This is just basically what was paid for 2019, 2020, and 2021. It's important to understand that for citations, we don't necessarily have 100% compliance rate. Get close to it, but this is basically where you have for the number of citations that were issued in 2021 that were paid.
Meaning that there were issued citations that people just
don't pay. That does happen.
Nobody told me that was an option.
Well, I want to caveat that to let you know that if you don't pay your parking citations, there will be holds placed on your car registration and other factors. So I do encourage everyone to pay their parking citation, but there are some people that do not pay their parking citations.
Noted. Okay, so what is our plan to address this so that so that we can issue the citations so that we can hit budget this year? And we've talked about this at I believe the past meeting. Technology, what are the costs for that technology if we were to implement something like that?
Right. The true key right now is getting more personnel, and I know that the police department is actively trying to hire people, and I can tell you just from my experience in California, hiring parking ambassadors right now is very challenging, and so just the fact that they have to go through the background process and everything that they must do by the time you actually get them a job offer, they've been, headhunted by somebody else as well. So I think that the key is, and Commander, I don't know if you want to speak to the hiring processes, not to put you on the spot, but I know that that's really a critical aspect of the operation.
It just seems like this is, we work a lot with workforce development, and it just seems like this is a challenge. So are there ways to avoid having to find those boots on the ground, the people that are out and bring in technology that can backfill that instead?
I hear where you're going. So because of the way the legislation is written in California, you actually still have to put a windshield on the car. The only time that you can mail a parking citation is when somebody drives away, which again, we don't encourage, but that does happen. It's the only time that you actually can mail a parking citation to a person is if they've actually evaded the scene. And so you do still have to have that physical, put a ticket on the car, and that is still a requirement by California statute. And we can do as much technology as possible, which I want to reinforce. Paso has done that with the handhelds. We've leveraged the license plate recognition technology. Our parking enforcement staff actually have handheld LPR units now too. Like as many advancements as we can equip them with, we actually have, but we still need the bodies to actually go out there and manage the program.
Okay.
Councilwoman Garcia, followed by Councilman Gregory.
Yes, thank you, sir. My question is on the employee parking. Are they being utilized? Are they full? And the second question on the employee parking, for the revenue part, I know that some of the businesses I've been talking to say that they buy permits. So is that money already in part of the revenue process?
That is, those numbers are included in the revenue process, is the permit monies as well as the paid parking monies. Those are all included in the targets. Right now, there is still available permit parking spaces. That's what's demonstrated by the off-street parking locations. There's still available parking in those locations. We do have good participation, But it goes back to Commissioner Fitzpatrick's comment. If we don't have the personnel out there to manage the street, the employees figure it out pretty quick that, again, it is only $5 a month, which I want to highlight. That's a very generous program that they can still get away with parking on street as well. So that compliance factor is really an important part of this program to make sure that people park where we need them to park, which is in, keeping the customer parking available for our residents and guests.
Okay. Another question I have is on the citation cost. So I know it's $33, I believe.
Today, the most common violation, which is the basically expired time or not having a paid parking session, today is $33.
So is that number something that can be played around with, or is that, set because of the California law?
No, it was actually one of the early recommendations for the program is to bring it back up to the comparable cities. And I believe that in this upcoming fiscal budget, you'll see that on the fee schedule, the request to not only increase that particular fine, but also in some cases bring other fines down to be more consistent with comparable cities. So I do anticipate that you'll see that change coming in this next fiscal cycle.
Okay, and then on the business validation, Mr. Hammond was asking about that code. I use the app a lot, but I don't remember it ever asking me if I have a code. Is that, so that's where, like, let's say I park at that moment, something pops up and it asks if I have a code to put in? Is that where
There would be a screen that currently, if your merchants, if you went and used it, they would basically have a code that they would initiate to your parking session. But there's also things on the menus that can be added. I think this is also an important place where when we talk about residential parking programs,
Right.
some of the things to also think about, and we did this very successfully in some other communities during what they call shoulder season or off-peak season. We actually leverage the app to push out promotional codes to encourage our residents to come into the downtown. And it's using that screen like you're describing where there's basically an opportunity to input those discount codes. A great example would be the movie theater right now where they add the third hour free. And so that's a module that they have through an app that's specific to their program. So I think you're just not seeing it today because there's really not a lot of participation really other than the movie theater. When the program first started, we had a number of merchants that were participating in the program as well because we offered the parking at a 50% discount. And so right now we haven't really had a lot of interest in the program. I would anticipate that if you all ended up eliminating the 2 hours free, we'd see a significant level of interest on behalf of our merchants to be able to participate. And there's a lot of incentive ways to get folks to participate in programs like that. But it would definitely be a part of the app that would be part of your customer experience.
And so when they put the code in, does that business pay the parking or we're just out of that revenue?
So it's up to you in terms of policy. What we did when we first launched the program here, we offered merchant validation at 50% off of the cost. So they were basically buying 50 cents on the dollar so that they were able to buy, we called it bulk parking discounts, and then they could distribute it as they see fit. And that's basically how most agencies do that is they allow for that discounted parking rate to allow them to participate and be a part of it. Sometimes those types of programs or promotions are only at the onset or launch of a program, and most cities do offer some level of a discount to merchants, but 50% off is a pretty significant one, but that would be a policy decision that you all would have to decide on or allow the Parking Advisory Commission to weigh in on that. So.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dixon.
Thank you. Councilman Gregory, then Councilman Strong.
Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So can we go back to the financial slide? Because I wanted to talk about that, little 4 squares. There, this one, that's perfect. So here are my questions. So if you still have the residents parking 2 hours free and we charge everybody else $1 an hour, our net, the net of $60,022, what is that net? That's all we're going to get back on the parking program, or what is that number?
Yeah, that's basically the forecast with the residents using the 2 hour free program. And the one thing I also want to highlight here, which I should have mentioned earlier, There's no way to distinguish the difference between a resident versus a downtown employee. And I want to highlight that is an ongoing challenge that we have with the current program, is that our employees do take advantage of the 2 hours free because it is a public street and they have the right to do that as well. But the number up there is basically what you would expect to be your gross gain.
And by residents, does that include everybody, including the tourists?
No, the residents would basically be similar to the decision on the senior permit program, folks that basically lived within the Paso Robles zip code. Sorry, did I say wrong? Within the city limits, forgive me, I said that incorrectly, city limits.
Okay, so the number that you have of $450,000, is that residents only, or is that residents and tourists?
So that would mean everyone basically pays, and we just tried to distinguish it between residents getting 2 hours free versus everyone pays. So I should have corrected that and made that everyone participates. So if everyone participates at $1 an hour, your gross gain is looked at to be about $450,000.
So this is where I'm having a problem understanding this chart, because I can't believe that the residents would make up $390,000 of that money.
Well, we can't forget is that the 2 hours free is where we've identified that the majority of your customers coming into downtown, the statistics have demonstrated that the majority of your visitors, guests, residents are coming into the downtown for 2 hours. And so that's really what's part of the challenge when we look at your revenue forecast, is that 2 hours, the majority of people are coming and staying within there. So when you start to talk about revenue forecasts, you're basically not having people stay for hour 3, hour 4, which is when you have started to charge monies. And so I think that that's really where you start to see that target, is that if everyone today, the majority of your guests are staying within the first 2 hours, and if everybody had to pay $1 for that first and second hour, that's why you're seeing that number being so much higher, because that's when the majority of your guests are coming in and utilizing your downtown.
Okay, well, I understand that, but I still don't calculate your statistics on this, because I don't believe the residents make up that great of a quantity of the dollars. So let me just ask the question differently. In the number of $60,022, if we have a software package in there that allows our residents to park for free for 2 hours, and everybody else pays $1, how could it be that low? I believe that the number of 450,000 is residents and tourists. But when it drops all the way down to 60,000, I don't think that's a correct number.
So that number includes, go ahead, sorry.
I just want to clarify, because in other words, maybe this should be 3 columns, because if residents are paying and the guests and the tourists are paying, you have 2 numbers for those. I understand if the residents get the 2 free hours, the residents' contribution to the program would be 60,000. But what about the tourist contribution to the total?
So again, the number, the 60,000, is basically estimates that there's a 70% reduction in paid parking sessions, meaning that without residents paying in that first 2 hours, the assumption is that that's 70% of the transactions that would basically not occur. And also the estimate for the $75,000 in expenses that would be associated with administering a resident parking program. So there's an estimate of about $75,000 annually that would go into supporting that program as well, because of the application processes and basically the management of a resident parking program, which we did learn from the senior parking permit what the impacts of that program are.
Okay, so let me go to the next 2. So if we were able to create a residence free and go to $2 per hour, our net revenue for the city would be $277,000 plus whatever leftover fees are left from the violations, correct?
Correct. I think one of the things we were really trying to highlight on this particular slide is that by providing residential 2 hours free, that you would still create a sustainable solution. I think that, again, very conservative numbers because we want to make sure that the city is covering their costs. And so again, there could be, the numbers might be higher on the estimate side, but to demonstrate with these kinds of reductions conservatively, you would still provide a positive on the revenue return.
So the real statistic of how much money we're gaining from tourists, not residents, is an estimate. It's an unknown, correct?
Absolutely. And it's one of the challenges that we have today is that we don't truly know, because of the transactions, we don't know who is who. And I think that's the simplest place, is that we didn't want to come forward with recommendations that weren't as conservative as possible, because we want to make sure that whatever decision that you make, there could be a much higher upside, a much more positive, but we wanted to make sure that we were covering the cost. So we tried to be very conservative in our estimates here.
Okay, and Julie, one more question. Sorry to be so technical. Is there an option of 1 hour free?
There is, and I can go to one of our additional support slides, if you'll bear with me. We tried to, again, keep it simple so that way we didn't bog down the project. So in this particular case, let me just look at that. So we have two options that we have in front of you. One is 1 hour free plus $2 per hour. And we also brought another model, which is the next slide, which is 1 hour free plus $1 per hour. I think it's important to also highlight what Councilman Hammond mentioned as well. You could also tie in a tiered model into this as well, which could be hours 3, 4, and 5 could be a higher rate. And you can see that that would bring that loss down dramatically as well.
Now, in Councilman Hammond's comment, I think he was referring to time of day. Is that something we do as well?
Yes.
So we could put the $1 an hour during the daytime hours, and then after 4 o'clock, go to $2 an hour.
And in fact, I hate throwing another curveball. You could also go to an evening flat rate, which is what a lot of downtowns have also done. You could end up with a flat rate after 4, and you could come up with a program like that as well. I just want to reinforce the fact that it really comes down to wanting to discourage the employees from parking in those spaces. So.
And what do you consider a flat rate? What does that mean?
Basically, you could have it be, $5 after 4. A lot of programs do things like that. I hate to even suggest it because I know we have so many options still on the table. But I think that the one thing I really want to highlight to you all is that there are several opportunities that you can bring advantage in. And even today, if we just decide on a path, I hate to tell you this, we're not done. Basically, it means that we make a decision today, and then, as the community continues to thrive and continues to grow, this is going to be an ongoing conversation. This is not a one and done conversation today. It means that we make these decisions, we pick a lane, and we reassess this in 6 months and then maybe a year. And so I think it's really important that when we talk about these conversations, even some of these one-off programs, that these are things that you can do to further motivate and incentivize, because you're going to have the data to help drive those decisions. And again, this is a good problem to have. I know it's not a pleasant conversation to have, but these are conversations that, just like at the beginning of this program, I want to make sure everyone understands that this is not just something you throw and it just sticks there forever. It's about adaptability, and especially as the community grows, and if you want to build that garage, these are the kind of conversations that will be ongoing.
So we absolutely, as a decision-making body, we have the ability to bring it back for review at 6 months or 12 months from now, right? So.
In fact, I encourage it. I think that to be able to have those regular reviews and that's the reason for the advisory commission for sure, is to basically keep an eye on things and then to know when to elevate it to council for those policy decisions.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Strong, followed by Commissioner Roush.
Thank you very much. I've got a lot of questions. First of all, obviously, there's cost and income calculated here, a combination. What goes into your cost calculation?
So the primary is the ongoing operation of the infrastructure. So when we talk about the pay stations, the transaction fees associated with it, the monthly management of those, that expense, so that's really the core root of the expenses is the infrastructure and the support. You also have budget line items for things like vandalism, sign replacement, repairs, maintenance, and support. There is an actual element of coin collection as well, reconciliation processes that go into the kit. And then we talk about the support and management of the program as well. So the personnel associated with the program too.
Okay, so when you say personnel, that would be what do we call them?
The compliance, yeah, the CSOs or the
And
ambassadors.
there's the police department that are
Yep.
our ambassadors.
Your ambassadors,
Parking
yes.
ambassadors. Good. Nice title. Okay, so citations. What percentage of that citation or what amount of that citation do we actually get?
That's what I was sharing earlier with Commissioner Fitzpatrick, is that I would take basically a 40% swag off the top just to assume for fees, distributions. We can report back to you with a more granular level of detail, and I'll look over my shoulder to see. We actually have that number, and if you'd like to hear it.
Yeah,
Just another moment,
they're paying
they'll bring it to the
33,
table.
but how much of that dollars comes to the city?
Looks like they're going to pull that information. I'll call up parking coordinator Donna.
Hi. So I will give you the actual numbers from 2021. So in 2021, our gross citation revenue was about just over $116,000. We paid just under $33,000 to county and state fees and approximately $22,000 in processing. So processing is all of the letters that are required, our enforcement software, everything we would need to actually generate those citations.
Okay, so we're getting more than 50% of it then.
Correct. So in 2021, we net just under 55,000.
Okay, thank you very much on that.
You're welcome.
Okay, so when we say the costs, now you mentioned it's all the equipment and all of that, but that must be amortized because you can't be taking that just as a gross figure. Because one handheld costs how much?
So there's also a monthly fee for the pay stations, for example. There's actually modems, and they're like mini computers at your curbside. So there's actually a management fee associated with each pay station, which is basically what keeps them alive and operating, allows you to change rates and, do all of those configurations. But you're absolutely right. There's absolutely an amortization schedule when it comes to the hardware investment. And that's something when we talk about the handhelds, the LPR, and the pay station kiosks. But you also pay, just like any software system, you pay monthly licensing or management fees associated with that. And that's really where your reoccurring costs are coming in. And that's all built into your estimates.
Okay, and the one-time upfront cost is also built into this, but that's spread out?
When we gave you the forecast on the revenue with all the red, that's with all of the expenses built in, again, like worst case scenario, with every number that you can imagine built into there, so that again, when you talk about making sure we're making conservative estimates, it includes everything.
Okay, and that total cost comes to, is that a figure in here?
Let me look and see here. So I'd say right now, we know we've got the general fund and then the annual expense being $282,000. So that's really where you're looking at that line item for that expense. You can see it's consistent across all of the models, and that builds in all of the expenses associated with the program.
So in that case, why are we showing so much loss? If that's the total cost for the whole year.
So when you start to look at the utilization in the field with the forecast on the revenue, that's basically where the math comes in for compliance. And it's where you see with the rates being that people are parking for less than 2 hours. That's really where you're not seeing that upside. You're basically paying for equipment because of the 2 hours for free, but you're not necessarily getting the revenue because people are in general leaving before the 2 hours. So you're not having people pay for that dollar per hour because a good chunk of your visitors and guests that are using the system are leaving before the 2 hours, which when you talk about a customer service model, I mean, you guys actually hit the mark when it came to the 2 hours and the truth of getting the employees off of the on-street at the basis of the goal. The program actually achieved that in general, but the fact is on the revenue generation scale, I don't think anyone anticipated that the majority of your guests were leaving before the 2 hour mark.
Okay, I'm still having a whole lot of trouble seeing how we can lose that much money if our cost per year comes out to $754,050. And we're showing that just residential use is almost that much money. It's just, I'm having trouble understanding that. I'm sorry. Anyhow, so when we looked at this whole thing to begin with, we said purpose is to manage on-street demand. And so how much have we considered what would happen if we had a business shuttle to shuttle those people back and forth? How much for a hotel shuttle? What does that do in solving that problem rather than having fees on the street? A free parking structure that could be built somewhere within the facility that would also accomplish some of that. Do we have any of the figures on that?
Yeah, we actually completed a survey and reached out to all of the hotels to see if we could generate interest and participation in the hotel shuttle concept, so that we could also potentially leverage their parking lots and have folks park outside of the core. And the majority of folks surveyed weren't interested in participating, nor were they interested in sharing their parking resources, because that was something that we thought could have a real offset in the downtown and making sure that we relieved ourselves of that. It's one of the reasons too why we showed the micro shuttles, because those have worked really effectively in other communities. The key is, where are we going to have them park? And that's identifying those locations. And I also want to highlight programs like that also do cost money. And that's the other part of the process, is we also surveyed to see if they would be interested in participating or help sponsor. And again, there wasn't a real interest in that particular part of it.
Okay, but the businesses right now, if they're using the program where they give gift certificates or whatever, that's a cost to them of some kind. That has to be built into their price and their pricing, right?
Right.
Okay, so how about their participation? What was the survey like for the businesses sponsoring it?
Since the program launched, we really haven't had much interest in the validation program because of your current utilization statistics showing that the majority of your customers are getting their 2 hours free. And so there hasn't really been a need for the validation. I think even the validation at the movie theater has been lower.
I think maybe I didn't make myself clear. What was the survey results of the businesses sponsoring the shuttle?
Sorry, we did not reach out to the businesses to ask if they would sponsor it, but I can tell you that the shuttle programs do offer what we call marketing wraps. And so to be able to solicit if businesses wanted to help sponsor or wrap the shuttles, those are definitely opportunities that would become available. We did not pursue the businesses' involvement or engagement in the shuttle services because we were trying to identify where they would park, and because the hotels did not express an interest in participating, those were really our available locations that we were going to try to leverage for folks to be able to park remotely as well.
Okay, so the other is still an unknown then, you say?
Yes, correct.
Okay, and the Regional Transit Authority, what was their cost or their reaction?
So right now, we have not engaged the Regional Transit Authority, but I do think it's a really great opportunity if we can, from what we have to date, was especially as a result of COVID, was the frequency of the cycles of the transit routes. But I highly encourage that if we could leverage the transit routes that could bring people downtown, some communities actually offer free vouchers for folks to ride the bus to be able to come to the downtown, and that's something we could definitely pursue as well.
Okay, so we have not assessed that.
Correct.
Either. Okay, so we still don't know how that would affect our downtown parking situation. Okay. And I guess that's pretty much my questions right now. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I jump in and maybe clear up some of the numbers regarding Mr. Strong's original question about how we get to a minus 2.5 million at the end of year 10? Just by way of looking at it. So I think one of the things that might be throwing you off is, and you'll see the general fund balance, 754,000 that's consistent across. So keeping that number in mind, if you add the loss, 180,000 to the 754,000 that's owed, then you get to 934. Without paying down that 754,000, you add 180,455 to 934, then you get to 1.1, and it keeps going all the way down. So at the end of 10 years, that's a cumulative total of $2.5 million that it was not realized. So that's the difference between the models. Each model pays down that 754. Once that 754 is paid off, then you start becoming cash flow positive, which was what the council had asked for originally. So hopefully that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Rauch. Just, you have to insist. You got to keep pushing it. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Questions on the presentation? Financial projections, annual revenue, 101,545. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, can you switch to the slide that has the financial data? Thank you. Fiscal year 21-22 budget, fines, 125,000. You were saying that is net of the actual fines charged?
I'm going to defer to my colleagues. Would you mind to repeat the question, Mr. Rauch?
On the financial data under fines at the end, it says 21-22 budget, 125,000. Your previous slide on 22 budget for fines was $270-some-thousand. Therefore, I'm assuming the 125 is the projected net.
I need to go back to that slide, forgive me. On this particular one, is this the one?
Correct. Down at the bottom, yep. 2022 budgeted $270,000 for gross citation revenue.
And that's assuming with the additional personnel as well. So that's an important part of that number.
Okay, can you go back to the other slide then? Then this is still a net at the 125, is that correct?
I'm trying to see the number that you're, thank you.
No, the third line from the top under fiscal year 21-22 budget, 125,000. Or any of those lines under fine is, for that matter, the quarter one was at 18,000 net, 2661 in quarter two, is that net? Are these grosses or nets, please?
Forgive me, this is a chart that came from the city's documentation, so if you'll just bear with me one moment. Just if you'll stand by one moment, we're just conferring.
Mayor Martin, as they're conferring, Suzanne Anshin has just entered the virtual room, so Commissioner Anshin is present.
Hi, I think the best I can give you, so there's a lot of different people, a lot of different numbers here. These numbers come from Ryan and our financial director. These are his estimations that he made at this time last year on what fiscal year 21-22 fines would be. The numbers that you were looking at was 270. That was an estimation based on from now, based on the increased citation revenue that we have been receiving because we have been issuing more citations as in the last 4 months than we were when Ryan made these projections 12 months ago. So that's the difference.
That doesn't answer my question. I'm sorry. Is these nets or after the cost? Is the total, you said 50%. So is the total budget for 21-22, 125,000. Is the budget for 21-22, 250,000. And then it's 50% net is my question.
The numbers that you're looking at are gross numbers.
That's a gross number, 125.
His projection.
Okay. You have fiscal year to date, quarter one, quarter two, quarter three. Are those actual numbers or the projections from last year?
Actual numbers.
Okay, you have a total of 21-22 fiscal year 21-22, 48,599. You have a budget, which I'm taking that it was before, so it's wrong, obviously, because now you're figuring $76,000 more in the fourth quarter. We have 1 quarter to go. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sounds like it's not going to be reachable, if you ask me. Second point I would be asking then, you have a gross income on a previous slide of $101,000. That means if it's 50% of this and you actually expect $125,000 in gross fines and $60-some thousand in net fines, it's obvious to me the $61,000 is not included in the income.
So
otherwise, you only have $40,000 in income from the parking meters, overall, period.
What I was mentioning earlier is the citation revenue is not included in the revenue forecast. And that's
Okay. So
intentional.
I'm just making sure I understand it correctly.
Absolutely.
Because it certainly seems to me when we come here and project a loss of $2.5 million, including the loan originally, but we're not including citations in the first place, you're really not giving a full picture of what's going on. Second of all, it just seems to me that budgeting $270,000, we're going to end up with $135,000 net, means our customers, and my most important thing is my customers, are going to be paying $270,000. $135,000 is going to somebody else other than the city. Just making that point.
Okay, any other questions? No. Any other questions from the council? Okay, so I have a few that haven't been asked yet. First of all, we had a conversation earlier about the parking validation program, which is used by a few. If I'm a business person downtown and I want to be a part of that program, how do I do that?
So the easiest way is to just email the email address and say, hey, I want to do validations, or contact Donna. And there's information on the city website as well. And honestly, there was a really big promotion. We went door to door when the program launched, and it just really petered out where folks weren't interested in it. But anyone could ask the question, and basically we could have them engaged in the process because the system exists today.
And you also said it could be accessed via an in-store app. Is that an app that I, as a business person, have to find and implement, or is it something that's supplied as part of the parking program?
So it's basically supplied as part of the program, and I think that the movie theater would be a great example, though. You could do it on a tablet, you could do it on a phone. There's a number of ways to make it adaptable. The majority of us can do it on the phone. That's how most businesses can operate off of it, but it's very simplistic because it's just an app that they would have that they can initiate the validation.
Gotcha. Okay. And then on a couple of slides, you refer to the resident discount. I'm assuming that's the 2 hours of free parking. So we're with resident discount, without resident. Okay. I just want to make sure I understood that. The parking email, parking@prcity.com. What's the traffic been like on that?
You know what? It's actually, we probably get 2 emails a day on the weekends, maybe, 6 emails a day. It goes to a group of us, and oftentimes it's somebody that wants to, clear up an employee parking permit request, or maybe if someone got a citation that they're just trying to figure out what do they do next. But the communications have definitely leveled out. It's not very frequent. With the senior passes, you can imagine we got a significant onslaught of people wanting to make sure they were in line for the senior pass. But honestly, it's really kind of leveled out again. So
back to the validation process again. If I'm a business person and I hit the website or the email and I want to be a part of this. You mentioned a 50% discount. Is that our policy now, a 50% parking discount to me as the business person? So basically, I'm buying parking at a 50% discount, right?
Correct. I just had to confirm with my colleagues that it is ongoing. So It was not just a one-time.
So I would be able to say, for the next fill in the blank year, I'm willing to subsidize my customer parking to the tune of $1,000. is that something I have to write a check to? Is that something that I get billed for? How does that work?
Well, we always prefer credit cards just because it's easier. But absolutely, any and all of the above. Ideally, you're paying for it upon receipt of the validation codes, just so that you're not chasing the money for something that you have already given out. That's something that a lot of agencies get in over their heads on sometimes, but being able to coordinate via check or via credit card, there's a number of methods that we can basically support for that.
Okay, and so then I get a regular statement, what, monthly or quarterly, saying you have X number of dollars left in your parking fund?
You actually self-manage it so that on your account, basically, you'll see where you are and you absolutely can re-up it. It's kind of like your, I'll call it your toll pass. If you have one of those fast passes, and you have to either, re-up it or add more monies to it, that's something that there's a lot of customer conveniences that can be provided to the merchants. And you also can do things that can incentivize your merchants, like you can have one-time promotions or, have different ways that you can incentivize folks to participate in the program as well.
And it seems like all the time we get reports, we're told how well utilized that 2 hours of free parking is, and that's really a small number of people that park longer than that. Begs the question, do we want people to park longer than that? I think in some cases, such as the movie theater, we do want them to park longer than that. What kind of response have you gotten via the email or other communication channels from business people saying, oh my gosh, I've got people that need to be here 3 hours and they're paying tremendous parking rates to be here?
Other than the movie theater, which understandably needs the more time, in general, you've got really positive response from your businesses that honestly, like the ones that we hear from say that the program really has created the turnover and the customer frequency of being able to come into their stores and businesses. I'll defer to the police department, but I don't believe we've really had many complaints. I've only heard support for the program. Is there anything opposite of that you all? I'm seeing head shakes, so that's really been a positive. And I think that that's the one thing as well when we talk about just the nature of just over the last 3 years. I know we went through the parklets, we went through a pandemic, but to see the thriving nature of the downtown, I think is really indicative of what the future also holds for you. And parking management is a part of that, like I mentioned. So.
Okay, and then two questions that are tangentially related but not intricately related to today's conversation. One is, if I've received one complaint about the parking situation, it's the physical configuration of the kiosks, because most people aren't that short. You kind of have to really bend over to see the screen, and depending on the time of day, the screen is practically invisible. What kind of feedback have you gotten?
So unfortunately, ADA configurations require the height. That is a challenge that I will say it's not just here in Paso, it's across the state. The height of the screen is specifically per ADA standards, so I think that's important. I think certain times of the day, glare is an issue no matter what part of the world that you're in. And what we've identified is that if we try to leverage the sun shields and sunshades, it honestly creates a different issue and a different challenge as well. So truthfully, it's just a matter of, you got to sometimes pivot. And anytime that we can obviously encourage the use of the app. And we've definitely received a lot of feedback too over the years on the app as well. And the vendor has been working hand in hand with us to be able to make those improvements too, so that we can make it as customer service oriented as possible.
When I type my license plate number into the app or into the kiosk, it makes no direct connection with my personal identity, right?
Absolutely. There is no lookup capabilities or anything like that. Same with the LPR that's roving the street. All that your license plate is, it's your parking identifier that says that you're eligible to park here and for how long you're eligible to park here. That's it.
And then the original reason, I'll take people back on the Wayback Machine here. The original reason that we got into this entire discussion was that downtown businesses came to us saying that employee parking was out of control, could not be managed. And the reasonable expectation of an employee was, if I'm being required to park somewhere else, I have to have somewhere else to park. And the city has actually set aside how many sites for employee parking now?
We have several parking lots, and they have been basically, you see all of the yellow locations, and the permits definitely there are being utilized. There is still ample locations. I would say the Railroad Street lot is absolutely the most prevalent and the one that we have the most capacity at. But when you look at the statistics, this will demonstrate all of the locations where we have employee parking availability. And absolutely, I think Railroad and 12th are probably the most, well, they are the most popular.
Sure, but are there dozens of spaces, hundreds of spaces, thousands of spaces for employees?
In the other locations, I would say that you can see that in some cases we're more than 50% occupancy. So in terms of parking availability, you have ample inventory to accommodate. And I think if we started to have more prevalent compliance in the downtown, we will see these numbers creep up. We have seen that statistically throughout the years with the program. The times that we have been able to ramp up, you see the employee parking permits spike. And one of the things that we are not talking about here today is the cost of the employee parking permit. And I do want to reinforce $5 a month is an absolute bargain and something that I've never seen in any other community. So it's a very generous opportunity in providing convenience to our downtown employees.
Sure.
And it's why many of our downtown merchants also pay for the parking permits for their employees.
But occupied or unoccupied, how many employee parking spaces do we have?
Let me just confirm on the number because it's been a while on the exact number. About 270 parking spaces.
270 employee parking spaces. Thank you very much. And going back to the feedback question, what's your feedback been on employee compliance from our businesses?
From employee compliance, I would say that, again, because of the number of permits that we have today and based on our occupancy, you still have a number of employees that are not parking in the parking lots.
But they are taking advantage of the system that's available to
Without a
anybody
doubt,
else.
the currently, not only with the senior pass, that we have some employees that have tried to purchase those passes as well, and the fact that we witness employees basically taking advantage of the first 2 hours, which they're eligible to do, but then being able to try to initiate their parking session. They're basically double dipping. They're parking for as long until they see the parking ambassador and then initiating their parking session. So they're definitely taking advantage of the program.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Strong.
Yes, just to follow. So the validation system is based on the same thing as Fast Track.
Similar, I would
Okay.
just say similar.
Fast Track, when your fund gets low, notifies you so that you can up it. Are we doing that?
So we are not doing that today. It's basically up to the merchants if they want to purchase more. And it's something that we could absolutely market more heavily. I think that only because the user base, our customers, have not been extending their time over 2 hours. I'm presuming that the merchants didn't really see the value in buying validations because of the fact that they didn't really have a customer base that were in need for it. But it's something we could definitely market harder on.
Well, how would they know if all of a sudden they were running out? Are these limited to only a certain number of hours available per validation?
So they pay a certain amount. For example, if they bought $1,000 worth of parking and they paid $500 for it, right, and based on $1 an hour, they basically have 1,000 hours of parking. As they divvy it out, I would anticipate that some of them probably still have a pretty good chunk of monies to still distribute because of the fact that they just haven't found the need to utilize those. And it's what I was going to mention too for the movie theater. We actually don't even have as high as I had hoped that we would see for the movie theater utilization on the third hour as well. So.
Okay, so is each validation only work good for 1 hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or what?
It's up to the merchant. So the merchant can give you 8 hours of validation if they want to. Each merchant can determine how much money they want to give you as a customer. So it's up to them and their own.
But then they have to keep track themselves of how much they've given out in order to know whether.
No, they have an application that shows, like if I had $1,000 and I gave you $8, then they'll see that I now have $992. So they can see that degradation basically.
Oh, that was my question. Yes. So they are notified. They do know that when they get low.
Absolutely.
That was my question.
Apologies.
Thank you. Commissioner Fitzpatrick.
Okay, so when we first started this program, did we do a survey of how many employees are in the downtown?
I think we tried to because it wasn't associated with the business license. And I think that as we did all of the door-to-door and all of the stakeholder outreach, we garnered numbers, but it wasn't per census. So I think that there was a lot of estimating based on the numbers when we did that pilot that first 6 months so that we could demonstrate what the impacts, and that's really how we measured it by occupancy. It's also one of the reasons why when we first did data collection at the onset, why we also did the perimeter streets so that we could identify the spillover effect of people basically going from the core maybe into the surrounding streets. And it's honestly one of the reasons why when we talked about 14th and some of the perimeter streets, why we readied those for spillover parking as well.
Okay, because working in the downtown myself and having a lot of conversations with the Main Street Association, we're under the impression, or I'm under the impression that it's, closer to about 2,000 employees that are in the downtown. And at any given time, 800 to 1,200 employees. So I think the comment that there are ample spaces available and saying that there are 270 spaces would not be correct. Knowing that if people are not able to park in those lots and we don't want them to pay, they do need to park in front of residents. And so then that also, of course, presents its own set of challenges. So I understand that the railroad parking is not being utilized, but the remainder of them, I can say that the last time we looked at these numbers and it showed that there was parking available at the on the 12th Street location is never been once in my life. So at least not during the timeframes that it showed. So I have a lot of question, a lot of concern with making those type of comments because I don't think that it's enough for staff.
So I'm with you on where my comment meant is that you currently have inventory available. I absolutely understand that there's well more than that number of employees in the downtown, but currently that percentage is not utilizing the spaces that are available. That's the intent of my comment, was not to say that you have ample, like an overwhelming abundance. It's simply that you currently have available inventory that is not being utilized. And that's the intent of trying to get people to participate in the program, is to be sure that you have those locations, that there are available resources today that are not being utilized.
Okay. Well, as a person that parks somewhere between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock every morning, I can tell you that Spring Street, Pine Street, which is not called Pine Street anymore, it's called, or the railroad lot, they're all 100% full.
Right.
The train station, no. It's a little challenging to walk 5 blocks with a laptop bag and a purse and all of those things. So, and then the second comment is, so we know that we continue to talk over and over again about not having the ability to enforce right now. We're not out there enforcing. We don't have the ability to do it. We don't have the people to do it. Completely understandable. This isn't Commander Davis's fault in any way. It's a challenge that many businesses are facing. We know that we have absolutely no way to address this or fix this because we have to have this in order to have it enforced. But then how are we saying that we know that people are only parking for 2 hours and then leaving? If we're not out there and we're not monitoring that somebody initiated something on their phone, on their app, let it go for the 2-hour time span and then just didn't pay to renew it, how on earth would we have that number to be able to say, oh, they drove away? We don't really know that, right?
No, we actually do because of the data collection. One of the commitments on the program has been able to make sure that we have the data collected by the different times of day. So that's actually where the vehicle identifier is so important, is that we have had the resources, and in this particular case, over this period of days, that have gone out and done the runs at different times of the day. And what we're basically leveraging is how long the cars are staying for. And we've done that consistently since the pilot of the program so that we could demonstrate how long the cars are parking for. So that even if I don't have the paid parking transaction or the registration at the kiosk or the phone, we have the data to demonstrate how long the cars are staying for. And that's what we've extrapolated that from the utilization numbers, basically. And that's been a pretty consistent average from the beginning of the program to demonstrate that people are staying pretty much less than 2 hours.
Okay, so out of the 11 days that we're looking at here, and checking at 9, 12, 3, and 6, and then running those license plate numbers, that's how we know that people are staying for the 2 hours or less.
Correct. And we've done that consistently since the beginning of the program.
Okay.
Are there any further questions from council or commissioners, including those who are online? And I need to say to the public that Commissioner Anshin has joined us. She joined us probably a half an hour or so ago. Any other questions? Not hearing any. So what I'd like to do now is open it for public comment. We'll take public comment, and with your permission, we'll take about a 10-minute break so we can all get a nice breath, get a glass of water, collect our thoughts and come back and talk about this thing. So with that, I'll open public comment, ask if anybody in the room would like to comment, invite you to the lectern. If you are online and want to comment, you should have a phone number that you can call. We invite you to do that now. And if you would please give us your name so we know who's speaking. Welcome.
Dale Augustin, 945 Spring Street, which is one of my addresses. I also have one at 5770 Vista Serrano Way, Paso Robles. When I first came to Paso Robles in 79, I learned about Pioneer Day. I'm going to remind you people, because you seem to have forgotten why we have Pioneer Day. Pioneer Day was to say thank you to all the people who live outside the city limits to come to town and not pay for anything, because those people came to town to shop. And the merchants in town love those people that don't live in the city limits. Right now, any program, including the senior program, is telling those people to go do what they want to do elsewhere, not shop here in Paso Robles. We have a pioneer spirit, supposedly, being maintained in this city by Main Street and the Chamber, and it's going away. People are going to go to Walmart. The reason that the parking program worked in San Luis was because there was no shopping malls in San Luis. The closest one that ever came up was Costco. Costco's jammed all the time now. But because San Luis Obispo was able to build parking garages, because of the large influx of people going into San Luis Obispo every day, and especially weekdays. Now, I've run into a lot of seniors. They don't live in the downtown. And when I tell them they can't get a parking permit after waiting a year, including myself, tough you know what. There's something wrong with this program. And I think maybe you should have considered the one I proposed that worked in Pleasanton. It was time parking, no paid parking. Pleasanton has a lot of shopping malls. Their downtown is still very vibrant because they installed time parking, no paid parking. I tried to get you to do that. No, you want to go to the expert. The experts got you the mess on 21st Street. We got benches on 21st Street designed by out of the county experts that nobody ever sits on. And here again, we got a paid parking program designed by an out-of-town expert that doesn't know what the people in Paso Robles really want. And it isn't working, and it never will.
Thank you, sir.
I think Norma had it right. Yank them out and sell them.
Is there anyone else in the room who would like to speak? Seeing no one rise, is there anyone online who would like to speak?
No, sir.
We have no one online. I'm going to close public comment at this point. And as suggested earlier, we're going to take a 10-minute break. Grab a glass of water and come back ready to talk. Thank you. the workshop back to order. We have had our staff presentation, we have had our questions of staff, and now we have completed our public comment section. And now we get to our discussion. And I know that we all have a lot of things we want to say about this, and hopefully at the end of this conversation, we're going to be able to synthesize a program to move forward that's the fairest to everybody concerned and makes the most logical sense. That being said, these solutions often are, if they are ever totally perfect. But I think a thing we want to keep in mind is, as has been expressed earlier, is this is going to be a fluid situation. Most likely we're going to be reviewing as we move forward rates and rules and whatnot to make sure that the program, whatever we put together, is tweaked and becomes even fairer for everyone concerned. So with that, I'm going to continue to swivel my head and try to recognize anyone who wants to speak. This is a workshop, so we're going to try to keep it as loose as possible so people can interact and share and respond to ideas. So I would invite somebody, including those who are online right now, to let me know if they'd like to chime in.
Hey, Steve.
Mr. Gregory.
Steve Gregory. So I'd just like to make a couple comments. This is really valuable. It's very, very enlightening, this whole meeting again as we go along. But I want to mention a few things that are really important for the businesses in town. And I can only speak to one business, but the one little business I'm going to speak to pays for 20 employees a month to the tune of $100 a month, $1,200 a year to keep their employees in the parking spots. And I think it's really important that a lot of businesses are doing that. And I listened to Gina speak about how some employees are not parking in the spots, and that I agree with that. But those spots are available, and I think we should continue to be responsible in the future to look for more employee parking. But we're not at full capacity, or they're not using, or they're walking, or something. I don't know what else is going on. The other comment I wanted to make is I'm trying to take a look at the choices that we have. And we have a lot of power in the programming, which I didn't realize he had from what Mr. Hammond asked of our consultant. And I think it's really important as a community that we try to do two things. You try to stay, you're never going to have the perfect basket, but if we stay as revenue neutral as possible, I think we should consider all things. And I won't give you my opinion until after I hear what everybody else has to say. But the one thing I do want to mention that is missing in our parking program, and I think this is a real opportunity. I had the experience of owning a hotel, a very large hotel, good-sized hotel in the county of San Luis Obispo. It was mandatory for us to have a shuttle. In our own city, Oxford Suites Hotel provides their own shuttle. And I think for planning purposes or policy purposes, the larger hotels that can afford to have a shuttle should have to be made part of their condition of approval. And that's just a suggestion. And we can discuss that as a policy issue. The other thing I think we should do, and I think that with the ability of the staff at Travel Paso, is I'm sure that Stacy and her crew could go out and find a group that would contribute or donate, or maybe we can do a co-funded shuttle device that can go to the hotels on a circuit and help our downtown parking situation. I know it's worked relatively well down in San Luis Obispo, and it works pretty well in a lot of communities around the nation. So I think that's something that we ought to at least have in our toolkit going into the future as we look forward to continuing ways to improve our parking. So that's my comment for now, and I'll chirp in later. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Strong.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And we're talking about parking, but when we looked at the whole thing in the first place, it's manage the on-street demand. And managing the on-street demand has ramifications far beyond just those parking spaces. It has to do with VMT, vehicle miles traveled, how far people are traveling to do whatever they have to do. It has to do with our employee situation, which is why we started this in the first place. And I'm looking at that hourly thing, the whole schedule of how we were and everything. And it looks like actually 2 hours free parking is working fine because there's plenty of spaces available. It's not nearly as hard to find a space to park downtown as it used to be. And obviously, most of the employees are not parking there, and the business owners are finding that beneficial because they're commenting on how great it is to have turnover. So they're getting more sales in some ways. I'm wondering how much sales revenue they'd have even more if we didn't have the paid portion. And I don't know. But I think we want to keep that free 2 hours. I'll be very honest. I think that actually going just to straight 2-hour parking limit during the day and then maybe a 3-hour parking limit for the evening hours and then take it off after a certain amount of time would be a much better way to go without having to pay for anything. Because if they exceed that 2 hours, they're going to have citations. The citation revenue is going to be a whole lot more than we're getting from paid parking. That would be one way to make sure people don't do that. It would also give us the option to be able to lift the parking limitations totally at the time that we have major events in the park downtown, which we have. We have approximately 48, I think, weekends a year that we have events in the downtown park. And people need to park. And usually they need to park for more than 2 hours if it's a concert or if it's some other special event that it's going to take longer than 2 hours. So I think many of us remember when that downtown was boarded up. That wasn't that many decades ago. And then we did something that actually changed it around. Mr. Rausch came in with the theater. And that theater all of a sudden made all the difference in the world because people started to come back downtown and businesses started to open up. And the other thing we discovered was, gee, we need more evening businesses. So we got more evening business. And we have different businesses open in the daytime than we have in the evening. And the evening businesses, people tend to stay because that's their social time, to really spend a lot of time, and they need more time to do that. And anytime we add parking fees, we're adding cost to the customer. And with the current fuel rates that have gone up, people are getting very conscious of what they're paying for things. And being conscious of it at the grocery store as well, those costs are going sky high. So with everything that's going on with costs, I can't see us raising any rates right now. The public is already screaming about how high everything is going. And that's pretty much the way I'm looking at it. The other thing is I have a large senior population in my area, and we do in the city. And I'm still hearing a lot from seniors that either they don't want to put their information in any kind of a machine where their credit card information can be available to somebody who they don't know, and they don't feel comfortable. And so they're not going to use it. And some of them just don't know how to use the machines, period. And they're just not technologically capable. And with that senior population, there are people in that category, quite a few. What they're doing is they're going to Templeton, and they're going to Atascadero, and they're going to San Luis to do their shopping and to do their eating. And that destroys our VMT. And that creates pollution, more so than if we had the free parking downtown with a 2-hour limit in the daytime and maybe a 3-hour limit in the evening. I think would be a much better decision. And I think we could still surplus our machines and find somebody who'd buy them for a way to reduce our initial cost that we had. And we'd still need parking ambassadors, which we used to call parking attendants or something to mark tires or whatever. And give out tickets if they have to. The employees, the business owners, I think, have learned the value of keeping their employees out of those parking spaces. And I would assume that we're going to have a lot more cooperation from the business owners in order to make sure that they're their employees keep parking in the lots or outside of the immediate area in front of their stores. That's my initial comments. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Who's next? Mr. Roush.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And those who are listening, this is John Roush, Park Cinemas. I need to address I understand it's on the presentation, but I really need to address the 3 hours the theater gets for free parking. I want to thank the city in the first place. We got the 2 original hours and another hour for the theater. It takes basically, by the time you come down, find a parking space, get to the theater, buy your ticket, etc., watch a movie, get back to your car, it takes 2.5 to 3 hours. Batman was over 3 hours and 10 minutes long. So everybody that went to Batman either paid for parking or found something else. For 4 years, we've been planning to remodel the Park Cinemas with power reclining lounge chairs in 7 auditoriums, new plush rockers in 2 stadium auditoriums, and a beer and wine bar. We're also planning phase 2, new wall decor, and new sound systems and projector upgrades. In early 2020, we were ready to pull the trigger when the pandemic hit us and shut us down. We've lost a fortune in the last 2 years. We have now acquired financing for phase 1 at a cost of $1.3 million and are ready to order the new seats and new flooring. And then we get hit with the city is now considering $2 per hour for parking. This is frightening and completely unexpected. We must ask ourselves now, what's next? Is it going to be 3 hours? Is it going to be 4 hours? $3, $4, $5? At what point does this end and what's the impact to us? I'll tell you what the impact is. Our matinee ticket price is $11.50 for general admission. Most films, as I said, require 2.5 to 3 hours of parking. At $2 an hour, that would be $5 to $6 an hour in parking fees to go see a movie. This adds a 50 to 60% cost to a customer to see a movie. Unacceptable. I must request this parking committee recommend and the city council agrees to an assurance and guarantee that the theater will continue to get the 3 hours of free parking. It's not a threat. Without this guarantee, we need to reconsider investing any further funds in the theater. And I suggest to you, it's very possible the theater may then go away and you will never get another theater in Paso Robles because the cost of building a theater today and equipping it is horrendous. I'd like to address a couple other things, I guess. The consensus for years has been to build a parking garage. If you review the workshop before we hired a consultant, most of the people said parking garage, parking garage, parking garage. The cost of land and construction keeps rising. It's time to quit kicking the can down the road. To that end, I suggest a site must be chosen now. If we're going to build a parking garage, you need to choose the site today. And of course, by today, I don't mean today. We're running out of potential sites. Hotel Ava is going to be built on the Hayward property. The hotel is going to be built on the Railroad Street property by Cowgirls. You have the City Hall property, but that's maybe problematic because of the spring. I suggest the Hunter Auto Body has been mentioned before. I think that may be problematic because of the size of the property. And you have 13th Street, which is so busy in the first place. How do you ingress and egress from 13th Street? I would also like to suggest behind the theater, not as a selfish thing, but as the property behind the theater has from between 10th and 12th Street, has 3 accesses to downtown, 12th Street, 10th Street, and the walkway between our building and the building next door. We need to address the cost of funding now because that's been our problem. Obviously, if we had the money in the bank and said, geez, we can build a parking garage, we would have done it. So we must identify the funding now and get on the ball. We've got to identify the stakeholders, and they must contribute their share. I would identify from my small brain, says 4 groups of stakeholders, and there may be more. The residents of the city. This downtown is a jewel, and the residents like to come here too. And the residents are the city, therefore the city is a stakeholder. The tourist. Hey, since this pandemic started, this is all tourism downtown. So it's the tourist are stakeholders. And I really like the idea Mayor Martin brought up at the last city council meeting of looking into the TOT tax and see if there's a way to raise money from the TOT tax so the tourists pay their share. And also the business owners and the landlords of the properties in the downtown are stakeholders. I suggest a parking assessment district where business owners and landlords pay a fair share. I would much rather have the theater pay a fair share of a parking district to get this done and down the road than to continue to drive away our customers. This started in 2019, the paid parking. August. By November, statistically, I can show you we lost 7 to 8% of our business. The silent majority votes with their money. They don't tell you about it, they just vote with their money. So the silent majority says, I'm not paying for parking, I'll go to the Atascadero Theater instead. And I think you can, that's actually in all cases in my mind. The silent majority aren't going to be telling you a lot of things. In my opinion, you have addressed the most impactful problem we had, which is employee parking. You also, I remind everybody, this was supposed to be cost neutral. We weren't supposed to be raising money.
Mr. Mayor, I apologize. This is Elizabeth Hull, the city attorney. I was curious if it would be possible for us to take a 5-minute recess at this point.
Okay. Can you hold your comment?
Sure. I can always take a recess.
Thank you. We'll take 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much for your patience. We took a short break at the request of the city attorney. We want to make sure that all the actions that we take and the procedures that we follow are fully legal, above board, accountable, and transparent. And because of that, I believe Attorney Elizabeth Hull is online right now.
Elizabeth,
Yes,
there we go.
Sorry.
Yes, if you could please speak up a little bit and let us know what problem we might have here.
Sure. So it became apparent during Mr. I believe it's Roush is his name's comments that the impact of the parking is unique to his business, which could have a direct financial effect on him. Generally, for most of the people on the parking commission, they would fall within the public generally exception that it's going to impact them the same as everyone else. But because of the unique circumstances and the comments that he was making regarding the direct impact to his business, I felt it was appropriate to take a brief recess and raise that issue so as not to result in a violation of the Political Reform Act. And so that was the issue that I raised.
Thank you. And what's the remedy for this situation, please?
I believe the appropriate remedy would be for the parking commissioner to not participate as parking commissioner any further to ensure that we don't have a violation. If he wanted to participate as a member of the public, that would be different. Certainly any member of the public can comment on the impact of parking on their business.
Very good. Thank you. This is an awkward situation. Mr. Roush is obviously a businessman in good standing in our city. He has participated in good faith in the issue of resolving our parking problems. But again, in the interest of being completely above board and consistent with the law, I would request that Mr. Roush step down from the Parking Commission. And at this time, we would reopen the public comment so that he can finish the information he's presenting to this joint meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I tender my resignation from the Parking Commission, but I would like to finish my comments. And if you might also note that I had asked you about them, so yes, we were kind of in a confusion there. Yes, I want to make sure my comments could be heard in public, if not otherwise. The rest is not directly involved with the theater itself.
Right. So I personally want to apologize. When Mr. Roush previously asked when he should present his information, I thought he was asking a procedural question. I said it should be done at this time in the meeting. As it turns out, the information that he has shared with us is what's caused the problem here. And regardless of whether he shared it as a commissioner or as a member of the public, it probably would have constituted the same conflict of interest. It's awkward and embarrassing. I apologize for causing that embarrassment for Mr. Roush. At this time, I would, on behalf of the city, accept his resignation from the Parking Commission. And I want him to finish the information presentation that he began, so I'm going to reopen the public hearing so that he can make public comment on the issue. Mr. Roush, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll start that over then, the last part. The consensus for years has to build a parking garage downtown. The cost of land and construction keeps rising, and it is time to quit kicking the can down the road and get it done. To that end, a site must be chosen now, and if necessary, acquired now. We're running out of potential sites. Cost and funding must be identified now. All stakeholders must be identified, and they must all contribute their share. I would identify from what I see as 4 groups of stakeholders: the residents of the city, meaning the city, they need to participate. The tourists, I like the idea of a TOT increase. And the business owners and landlords, which I am suggesting a parking assessment district where business owners and landlords pay a fair share. As a business owner, I would much rather pay a fair share in assessments than to continue to drive away our customers. It is my opinion you have addressed the most impactful problem we had and identified originally, which is employee parking. Thus, while moving forward on the garage, I suggest we either leave the parking as is, or my preference, remove the kiosks, eliminate paid parking altogether, and initiate time parking, whether it's 3 hours in some spaces, 2 hours in some areas, or I'm sorry, 2 hours in some areas, 3 hours in some areas, 4 hours in some areas. So we have free parking for everyone. This results in no more senior permit problems, no more complaints about the kiosk, and a much more friendly Paso Robles. And when we bring up that there are no complaints on record, I suggest that you think about the silent majority out there. They're often not going to complain at all. They're just going to go somewhere else. In my opinion, this has been a failed experiment, and we are the guinea pigs. Whichever way is decided, the cost of overruns of administration could be included in the stakeholders' participation in a parking district. And I will also point out $182,000 loss, which we're not including fines for, of $60,000, brings it down to a $122,000 loss. And I'm glad Councilman Strong brought up these. If the parking industry finds these kiosks are so popular, there must be cities who would love to buy them back from us at a discount, and we could recoup some of the costs. And then on top of that, 180-some thousand minus the 60,000 they're talking about in fines net is 120,000. And then we can end the parking consultant's contract and save another $57,000 a year, down to about 60 or 70,000 a year deficit, just the way the parking is today. With that, thank you for your time. I'm sorry it ended this way.
Mr. Rauscher, thank you again for your participation and also for the obvious benefits that you and your business have brought to the community. And I personally apologize for the awkwardness.
Mr. Mayor?
We're still in public comment. Do we have anyone on the line for public comment?
Yes, sir. Stacy Jacob.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor Martin and members of council. I wanted to make a couple of comments on that was brought up by Councilmember Gregory regarding shuttles. Yes, hotels obviously are wanting to get their tourists circulated around the area and around town. I think there might be another solution rather than asking hotels to invest in the infrastructure of shuttles when staffing is already at a premium. Now with the invention of Uber and Lyft rides everywhere, there are also ways that we could look at an opportunity to employ those folks and look at some kind of guest services option. We've done this in other communities with other clients where for a particular day of the week, time period, we can actually offer codes and we can communicate that through hotels to circulate travelers and tourists in and around our community. These can be geo-targeted to certain areas. It would be another way to get tourists into the community and eliminate the need for additional infrastructure and staffing. So I wanted to offer up maybe a more likely short-term solution that could help. And then I think long-term, of course, I know the conversation is moving into parking garage. I think we have to, as a community, look at what is the best option for the next 30 to 50 years so that we can really help move ourselves not only out of this challenge that we're currently in, but how do we look at what infrastructure is necessary to ensure Paso Robles is successful for the long haul. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else who would like to make comment?
Yes, sir. Martha Wilson.
Welcome.
Martha, can you hear us? And do you have a comment?
Yes, I can hear you.
We can hear you. We're ready for your input.
Okay. Hello, Mayor and Council. I was just calling. I have sent emails regarding my suggestions or opinions on the parking, and I know you have received them. I just want to follow up the phone call. As far as the parking structure, is there any lots, I asked before, that are available that they would consider building a structure on, and that lot being used as an open parking lot with maybe like a lift gate for people to take a ticket to pay for a spot to pay for their parking space for the day or hours or what have you, and let that money go towards putting a parking structure up in the near future, maybe on that lot. And these lots would be not would be used for excessive over parking that's needed if the downtown parking is full during an event. And also, I'm for removing the kiosks, going back to square one, and just have open parking where anybody, no matter what age or wherever they live, they can just come in, park, and shop, and enjoy their time in Paso as a Paso resident as well. So thank you. That's all. I just want to follow up on my emails.
Thank you for calling.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.
Is there anyone else who would like to comment?
No one else online, sir.
We'll close public comment, bring it back to the council. We will resume our deliberations. Mr. Strong.
I want to ask a question of Mr. Roush because of his comments, if I may.
Certainly.
Mr. Roush, you mentioned that you suffered a loss in your patronage during that particular time. Yes, would you come to the mic, please? And you said that people might have been going somewhere else, but some people might think that it was just the pandemic and everything that's just lowered attendance. Do you happen to know how other theaters may have fared during the same period of time?
Absolutely. My statistics are not based on the industry. They're not based on the movies that were playing at that time. It's not a year over year or year or 2 years ago. It was strictly, statistically comparing to a Tascaderos theater compared to mine. We play the same movies, and the reality is we lost 7 to 8%, and Galaxy gained 5 to 6% from by November of 2019, and the pandemic didn't shut us down until March. So this has nothing to do with the industry. It's strictly what it had to do with us.
Thank you.
Other comments? Mr. Talon.
Yeah, this is Mike Talon, Cold Stone Creamery. Question for the city attorney. You just asked Mr. Roush to step down. My business is a couple doors away from him, as is Commissioner Casillas. Anything that happens with the parking decisions does directly affect the two of us. Should we be stepping down as well?
As I understand the situation, the movie theater has the unique setting of getting the 3 hours free parking, and that the rest of the businesses in downtown are subject to the regular parking rules that will apply to everyone. And so based upon that, you would fall within the public generally exception and be able to proceed.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Strong.
I'm wondering if the city attorney is aware that all the downtown businesses do have a special half price option that has been recommended and is part of that decision. So they are treated differently than everybody else.
But they're all treated the same.
Well, all the downtown businesses are, but that would include Mr. Roush's, except that he gets 3 hours instead of just one at a time.
I'll ask the city attorney if any downtown business has a conflict of interest based on the fact that they all have the opportunity to offer parking validation.
No, I don't believe they do have a conflict of interest, again, because they would all be treated the same as a group, and that would fall within the public generally exception to the conflict rule.
Thank you. Further comments? Is that Karen? John.
So what I've been writing down notes-wise all along is kind of getting back to where we started here a long time ago. And that, Fred Strong said it, everybody else said it pretty much. We started this because we wanted to manage the downtown parking. And it had to do a lot with the employees, but also just the fact that if we're going to be trying to go somewhere with a plan to do a structure, we need to manage it properly. And that was the two goals that I think this council really probably needs to adopt and get into deeper. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it. And that is, again, managed parking and then also plan for a structure, those two things. And I've asked staff to get into this a little bit because I think if those are our goals, that's what we're going to do here. We need to figure out, because it all hinges on how much we're going to pay for this structure. I think, again, the goal is if we do get a 400 space structure, which is kind of what we've been kicking around, staff has been talking about, price tags and such, what that's going to be. That should hinge directly on how we're going to set up our parking to pay for it, right? I mean, that's just like you buy a house, same thing. And if we do that, again, it's going to, I think, answer a lot of questions on what we're going to want to have to do here. Bottom line, where are we going? If we're trying to improve the downtown and get things, continuing to be evolved down there, I think the structure is really, really important. It's a goal in my mind that, all other cities have always done it. It's clear that that's going to be helpful, but how do you pay for it? So I think we know that we have to have some sort of revenue stream. First step is, of course, and we've learned to have some sort of on-street paid parking rates. Bottom line, to have a revenue stream. Also, I think that we should have, again, that TOT that we've talked about. A percentage of that should be separated where we pay for this kind of an effort in the downtown. And then also, John even said it, and I thought of this a long time ago, having a downtown merchants assessment district for parking. I mean, my building that I built, not in downtown, but it's a commercial building. I had to pay for my parking. I have to maintain that parking. Everybody else down here does not have to pay for their street parking. So that's another way of having them have a little skin in the game, so to speak. I'm trying to figure out all these revenue sources, right, of how we're going to pay for a structure, if that's what we're going to do. And that then is going to figure out in 30 years how we're going to pay this out and what's the rate's going to be to pay for it. Well, I mean, it's real simple. I asked actually Julie to kick out some numbers, and she has a what if spreadsheet. Those are great. When you plug in things, you see at the bottom what it's going to be real fast. And I think that's something we need to, I think, as a council, make direction to staff, that if we're going to do this, bring back to us what it's going to take per hour. And then when you get into that, we can still have free parking. You can still have, the idea here is to have 85% of the space is always available, or occupied, basically. So you have a little bit of space there. When you drive down, you should be able to find a space. So you manage your parking rates, time of day, length of stay, to make that 85% number hit. That's the goal. So if you make that parking 85% happen, you're going to be having a revenue stream that's going to pay for a structure. Okay. Pretty simple. I just think that if that's the goal, that's the direction, and we can't get into the weeds as far as all the little numbers of what's going to make that happen. But if we give them staff, this is what we want to do as a council, and the parking commission agrees that this is where we want to go. I think this is where we need to come back to. It's not that difficult.
Councilman Strong.
Yeah, John brings up some very good points. We have slight disagreements on how we do this. Number one, there's some things that hinge together on this. One is, and that back lot here was mentioned, and we've also talked about we have to get and build a city hall. We need a geology study here to find out if there's any structural ability back there to go up that extra building over this parking lot. Maybe not right over the spring area, but maybe over some of the other area of the parking lot to get that city hall so that this can become all library, as was originally intended, and have 1 or 2 floors of parking as well. But if the downtown parking is for the benefit of the downtown, then I don't think we want to go to GO bond or even to paid parking, because that defeats the whole purpose. And yet, if it's a benefit to the downtown, then it should be maybe in the parking district. As you pointed out, other businesses have to pay for their parking and maintain it, whether they're in a shopping center or a business park or whatever. Same should be true of the downtown as a unit. And at one time, we had a parking district. And we did charge certain fees for if they didn't have enough parking. They were very insufficient for actually replacing a parking space, though. So a parking district, and those are available under the state of California. That would be attached to their property tax. over a 30-year period. And we could use part of our TOT if we wanted to offset that cost by 50% and pay half of that cost out of TOT. That would be another possibility. But I think there are ways to do that. But I think, first of all, the most available large spot we've got downtown is right behind us, right here. If we could solve the issue of the spring, which we did solve to some extent, but possibly most of the parking lot was not affected. And there may be structural capability to do that, and the city hall that we've been promising for 20 years. And I think maybe that's why we have to instruct staff to do some of this stuff, bring it back to us, so we know where we can go in that respect. And then also, I would think, continue the existing program for 6 months when we do that next review, and let this ride right now because it's working. We're getting that vacancy rate downtown that we need. And some city employees or some downtown employees, are obviously scamming the system. But one thing we all know, that no matter what law you put in that's restrictive, somebody who's determined enough is going to find a way to scam the system somehow. Not very many people, and most people will just try to be law-abiding citizens, but there's always a few. And that's
Councilwoman Garcia, followed by Councilman Hammond.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Mr. Hammond, I have actually asked about the parking district because I had someone in the community came to me and to the pharmacy, and we're talking about, we used to have a parking district here. A suggestion that was made was even widen the parking district to not only get the downtown, but also maybe, a couple blocks further, because everybody, once we get the structure, everybody's going to be able to use it. Hotels that are coming in, restaurants. So they were saying maybe enlarge the district, something that we can have staff look at. Because I think the way the map was of the old district, maybe we can look at enlarging it. That was an idea. To be able to pay is one of the tools to pay for the structure. Another thing that I, been writing notes on as well is we don't have the accurate numbers. We obviously don't have the ambassadors that we need. So I don't feel that we're getting all the accurate, financial information at the moment. We're not getting all the citation money. We're not getting everything that we need to be able to make too many changes. I feel that what we have now is working. I don't think that we should change it until we get more information. But I do think that I'm with you on looking at other options on how we can get money to put into that parking district assessment. Also, I feel that if the businesses, this all started because of the employees, I really do feel that every business downtown needs to just step up a little bit and manage their employees. This is how our problem first started. And so, I don't want to put more work on downtown association or more work on the chamber, but we need to find out what businesses are purchasing permits, what employees are using them, things like that. Because if we're getting on one hand that the employee parking lots are not being utilized, but then on another hand, they are being utilized, we need more accurate information. I'm not downtown every day. I'm not downtown at 8 a.m. and then noon and then I don't know. But I do need more accurate information as to, are they being utilized? We have 270 spaces for employees. How many employees are using them and how many more do we need? Or maybe take away an employee parking and use it more for the residents or more for the, tourists that come in. We don't know. I feel like I'm not getting enough information to be able to make a change on that today. But I do feel that we need to come up with something, a plan for our parking structure.
Thank you. Councilman Hammond, followed by Councilman Gregory, followed by Commissioner Fitzpatrick.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from, Maria. I think, again, we as leaders have to make direction on what we're going to do. And again, if we're going down that road where everybody seems to think, and I totally agree, that additional parking must be done. How are we going to do it? Parking structure. Where are we going to put it? Here, over there, I think between 12th and 13th, really, I think there's all kinds of places that are still vacant that we could make happen. Kicking around numbers, I'm going to ask, Ty here a little bit on what he can share with, costs on something like this. $25-30 million. Just if you divide it out in 30 years, it's $800,000, $840,000 a year. Put debt service on that, all the other things, we're already hitting those numbers. If we get it to the parking $2 an hour. So what I'm getting at is we need to have a plan. That's without going out for any kind of a bond. This is the whole system paying for itself. And I think, again, maybe, Ty, this might be a good time for you to maybe step up and share some of the things that we've been talking about. I think, again, it's, important that we throw numbers out to understand really what council is going to be, looking at if we're going to do something like this. And, it's every day we talk, it's going to be more expensive the next day. So time is of the essence, so to speak, if we're going to make a plan. So can you help a little bit on that?
Yeah, Mr. Hammond, I think your comments are spot on. Building a parking structure is super expensive, to say the least. We have a local developer that has significant experience with parking structures that prepared. He, on his own initiative, has been listening to these conversations and is also is a business owner within the community that stepped up and took the initiative to draw some conceptual plans and provide some preliminary estimates. Based upon his experience, I can tell you that design is one of the key drivers of the cost. So he gave the example of, I think some of you might be familiar with the Mind Body parking structure that was built in San Luis Obispo. It's some time ago now, and at that time, that parking structure was about $35,000 a space. That's not a public parking lot that was subject to prevailing wage either. His local estimate for a parking structure would be just cost, non-prevailing wage costs, doesn't count property acquisition, nor does it cost any of the hookups or recurring costs, employee costs to run them. His estimate was about $13 million. You can add 35 to 40% for prevailing wage to that. Once you factor in all those things, I don't think it's unreasonable to be looking at about a $25 to $30 million structure when all is said and done. I can tell you that the city of San Luis Obispo is looking at building another parking structure currently. Their costs are upwards of $100,000 per space to build their parking structure. So there's a wide range. If you intend to use a parking structure for more than parking, meaning office space, retail space, it significantly drives up the costs. Again, debt service, just to cover that alone, $30 million parking structure over 30 years is about $1 million a year without recurring costs. So it is expensive to park. If the city were to entertain a GO bond, general obligation bond to do that, I think that the costs, as we said, $1 million a year to pay for and bonding against people's property would far exceed any costs for on-street parking that most people would pay. So I think that you'd have to convince the voters that putting a bond on their property for several $100s a year potentially outweighs the ability to park off street here in our downtown, walk a block or two, versus parking in the prime, core of the park to pay for that. As was mentioned, there are other options out there. Increasing the TOT would be one source of revenue that City Council could exercise. If the voters were to approve that, of course, it would take voter approval to increase the TOT. On the community side of things, we do have a model. Travel Paso and other groups have a business improvement district that they self-assess, but that requires the majority of the businesses within that improvement district to assess themselves to pay for it. So that is a possibility. And of course, there could be some sort of ballot initiative that the community could bring forward that would also reduce the 2/3 requirement to put a bond, a general obligation bond together to pay for a parking structure. So there's a lot of options to do that, include paying for it out of the general fund. But I would remind council that currently we have over $336 million worth of roads that we have to repair. In addition to that, we have about another $100 million in infrastructure needs, including 3 bridges that we still have to build, in addition to the other work that's going on throughout the city. So hopefully that answers your questions, and I can expound upon those as needed.
Thank you, Ty. Yeah, that's painting a picture basically that is doable. How we're going to do this, I think, is really council's direction at this point.
Legal question?
Okay.
And the legal question is, you mentioned we have to go to the voters for a TOT increase. I'd like to hear our city attorney weigh in on that. Because they're not being taxed, I'm not sure that's true. I think we may have to go to the hoteliers.
City attorney advises.
I don't think we have to go
TOT
to the
requires
voters.
public vote.
I apologize. Took me a minute to hit the mic off. Yes, actually, a TOT increase does require voter approval.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Councilman Gregory, followed by Commissioner Fitzpatrick.
Okay. It's okay for me to speak?
Your turn.
Okay. So I'm going to agree with both John and Maria. I think it's important to keep this program going because it eventually will become a resource or a source of income to do a parking structure. I haven't personally always been in favor of a parking structure, but if that's the way we need to go, we most certainly must keep a parking program in place. I want to speak on behalf of a lot of the businesses and some of them who have not been able to speak up today, that the parking program has worked. It has opened up a lot of ability for the businesses to succeed. It's taken the employees off the parking and put them in employee parking areas. And yeah, we probably need to work a little harder in getting more employees there. I don't know what the number is. Julie, do you have the number of people employees parking now in those areas?
Julie, you want to respond to that?
We currently have 320 employee parking permits sold.
Thank you.
Okay. So that number can obviously grow because we have some vacancy, but I think that's the highest number I've seen. We're seeing a pretty good return on the parking and the plan. If we just go to $1 an hour and 1 hour free parking or whatever it is we choose, I think we can continue to perpetuate to move ahead with planning for the future. And if it's building a parking structure, I think we should keep this in place. We have a lot. I think it's really important in this meeting today is to consider this one of our resources to provide that money. We need to have a separate meeting, the Parking Commission, and can have a separate meeting with our staff and figure out what kind of financing we need to do or what we're going to do for building a parking structure. I like the idea of the TOT. That's a good contributor for several different expenses in the city, but I think it'd be a good use for the parking structure. So, and I don't know how to do this. I think that we should continue to keep the program in place. I think we should modify it a little bit to get more revenue neutral or revenue positive. And I don't want to affect the theater business. I just want to keep it going so that we have a program where we have income. The program is working for the businesses downtown. It's keeping the employees off the parking areas. And now that we've opened up the parklet areas, you have more parking available. So I think that, I think we keep moving on this program and then go to the next level with how we pay for the financing on a structure and how we change things in the future. But I think for today's meeting, what's in front of us is how to deal with our parking rights and our existing parking program. And I think we should discuss those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. I agree with everything that everybody said. We know that we have a challenge in front of us, no matter what way we slice it. Again, we have this large number of employees that have to park somewhere. So in front of the residents' houses or somewhere in the outskirts, no matter what, it's a challenge. It is hard to make decisions based on what we see as incomplete information. I acknowledge that and agree with that. I think that there are so many other factors involved as well in looking at employee parking, where the open spaces really are, nighttime schedules, et cetera. All of that said, I would like to say from an economic development standpoint, we saw through this pandemic when we watched the businesses in our downtown be heavily impacted due to shutdowns, the remainder of our community was also heavily impacted. I don't believe that in improving the ability to access our downtown area and our downtown businesses is solely on behalf of those businesses. I believe that it's the ecosystem in general. It's all of Paso Robles and the outskirts. It's looking at that ecosystem, knowing that we need to be able to be open for business and have great places for people to be able to come and access. So for me, my recommendation is yes, to look at a parking structure as our only option at this point to move forward, because there hasn't been any other way to solve this. There are no other solutions apparently that are easily accessible to us. I would think that if we prioritize this as part of the budget process, and then in addition to that, we're looking at the revenue streams and finding other ways that we would be able to enter into these agreements. So the parking district, we know that E12 sunsets very soon here, the GEO bond D98 that sunsets in 2028. I think that where there's a will, there's a way. If we can include these other bridges and things like that in this big picture, I think the community as a whole knows that we need to improve in our infrastructure, and that if we want to look at our overall well-being, this is very important to that.
Thank you. Councilman Strong.
Yes, I'm wondering one thing about the cost and the income. And that is, if we remove the personnel costs, is the current program still in a deficit situation? Because city's function is service. So we have a lot of personnel costs that we never recoup, and that's why we collect property tax, that's why we collect sales tax, and a lot of other things to pay for. So maybe Julie could answer, if you remove the personnel costs out of there, are we still in a deficit?
City manager, were you looking? Sorry. So if you remove the personnel costs, you will still be in a deficit. And it's one of the reasons why we're recommending changing to a paid hourly rate and basically removing the 2 hours free.
Thank you. Thank you. So, my turn. First, I want to remind everybody that according to the agenda, the action before us is an approval by the City Council of the Downtown Parking Advisory Commission's recommendations regarding changing rates. We're not making a recommendation or a decision about parking structures or anything like that today, although those discussions are part and parcel of the solution of this. That's not the action in front of us today. Secondly, I want to thank our Parking Commission, because on more than one occasion, the City Council has passed the buck to you and asked you to do the impossible. Take something that's very valuable to the city and somehow make it cost neutral and make it free. And you've done your best, and I appreciate the work that you put in, and I appreciate the fact that you're here today. Those who are seated and are not seated right now, I think you've done a great job, and I appreciate the time and effort that you put into trying to make sense of this entire situation. I'll do a little bit of my own history. I won't go as far back as 1937, but some of the council will remember how this discussion got started several years ago when our downtown businesses came to us and said there was a parking crisis. That, in fact, if we did not increase the availability of parking, and by that they meant if we do not address the fact that our employees are parking in front of our stores, that our businesses are going to suffer, and then the city's going to suffer because the retail sales tax will go down, and the cascading effect continued and continued. At that point in time, the city council did say, okay, let's not pretend this problem doesn't exist. Let's not talk about it. Let's do something about it. We did hire professionals. We did do surveys. We did implement programs at great cost because we believe that our downtown businesses were telling us the truth and painting an accurate picture what the impact of parking in downtown was. I think that, you know, over the months and now years that we've talked about this, I think the situation has sort of turned into this sort of Gordian knot of conversations that, you know, employee parking tangles with customer parking, tangles with senior parking, tangles with parking structures, and we're just unable to focus on what the situation is. So I try to break this down into very simple parts. We were asked originally to address the issue of employee parking. In addition to the parking system that we put in effect, we did set aside parking for employees. Granted, not enough for every single employee in the city, but we do have employee parking places right now so that people who employ folks are able to say, I really don't want you parking in front of the store because a customer should park there. And oh, by the way, there is a parking lot for employees, which is safe and convenient and inexpensive for you. So we accomplished that. The second issue was customer parking because as we heard and believed that the more availability of customer parking we have, the more profitable our downtown business will be, which is good for our downtown, but of course, in turn, good for our city. So we have the parking program that we put in place. Sort of an extra added layer of complexity came on at the last minute when we started talking about the necessity of exempting a certain group of citizens from parking requirements. Thus, the conversation about senior parking ensued and made things even more complicated. The council recently simplified that by putting a renewed senior parking program in place, one that can be reviewed and changed in the future if necessary, but that has been addressed also. So that's where we are today. And I think moving forward, in my mind, there are several things that we as a city need to come to grips with. First of all, the recurring issue of the $742,000 that we spent to put this program in place. And we've classified that as a loan to the city. And part of making this revenue neutral is paying that loan back. I would suggest that this loan is actually an investment in municipal services. We invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in other services to many sectors of our community, and we don't call it a loan. I think we need to look at this as an investment in this program, which will in the long term pay off in more profitable businesses and a more profitable city. So I think we should take that column off the report. Not that we don't know we spent that money, we did, but we need to change our minds about why we spent that money. The operating loss, I think that if we change that classification, our operating loss will also look better, but also I think that we have very conservative figures in front of us. And I think as the economy continues to improve, we will see that operating loss shrink to a much smaller number. And my feeling about that is that we look at that as further support for our downtown. Every year now, we give the Chamber of Commerce tens of thousands of dollars. We give Main Street tens of thousands of dollars. If this is as vital to their survival and prosperity as we've been told that it is, this is incrementally in supporting those organizations, which every year we're asked to do anyway. So this is one way for us to directly do that. Third, the parking structure. I think from the beginning, the parking structure was this is a solution. But then as time went by, we all kind of got a more accurate vision of what a parking structure was and what it was going to cost, and it was have to be operated. And it is a very big ticket item. That doesn't exclude it from consideration. And I think what I've heard expressed by everybody here is we need to start looking at creative ways that we can plan for a parking structure in downtown Paso Robles. That would include, but not be restricted to, things like TOT, tiered rates, which Councilman Hammond referred to, possibly differential parking rates for tourists and special events, possibly a parking district, possibly a geo bond. As unpopular as that might be, maybe that's part of the solution. But there are component revenue sources that could be melded together to put together a plan to create a parking structure in the foreseeable future. Not tomorrow, not next month, not next year, but can put us on the road to doing that. So what I would like to do today is to maintain the parking system we have right now, to realize the money we have expended today is an investment in our downtown and an investment in our citizens and a service to our citizens, and to leave the rates as they are right now and instruct staff to start putting together strategies for creating a parking structure in the future. That would be my recommendation. Leave the parking rates as they are right now. 2 hours free, $1 per hour after that.
I would second that motion.
I'll make that motion. I have a second by Councilwoman Garcia. Is there further discussion? Mr. Strong.
Well, I'm gonna vote yes on this motion, but I feel a little bit misinformed because I specifically asked a question of whether this meeting was going to be full discussion of the parking situation. And when you said no, the only thing before us is this particular item.
I just wanted to respond by saying I think we have had a very full discussion of every aspect of parking. All I'm saying is the action before us is not about a parking structure right now.
All right, fine. I'll support the motion.
Mr. Hammond.
I can't support it because we're not getting into the black. I guess testimony from staff would be, I would think, that the way our rates are right now, we're not meeting our goal of 85% occupancy. In other words, it's too cheap. In other words, I guess bottom line. And we need to get it moving in the right direction, council. I would rather try to start making a movement toward that direction instead of just keeping it status quo. We got to make some sort of a position here that we're going to start moving toward a goal of a structure, and in the first case, making this whole parking effort in the black. So to do that, I mean, I think the first step is to maybe start reducing the free time, you know, from 2 maybe to 1 this year, next year, you know, change it again, and then increase the rates. I had all kinds of schedule when I was working with Julie over here on her spreadsheet is what ifs. In other words, what do you do when something changes? You know, no free parking, 1 hour free parking. There's all kinds of things that we can do. But what I'm getting at is I can't support keeping it as normal. So
if I could make a suggestion, John,
yeah.
And I hear what you're saying, and I'm torn between, you know, getting in the black and making progress on this. But since we've also talked about the flexibility of revisiting this regularly in the future, I might suggest, and this is like off the top of my head, so laugh me out of the room if you want to, we might want to put in this like an automatic, we do like cost of living increases on other things.
Escalation.
So if we were able to put an escalation clause on this, it would not raise parking rates substantially, but at least it would keep track with other expenses. That's just a suggestion.
Yeah.
Councilman Gregory.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Councilman Hammond. There's one way to do this where we get pretty close to revenue neutral and not change the parking rate. And that is just drop down to 1 free hour and $1 an hour afterwards. And the businesses have the opportunity to offset that parking for the extra hour. I think it's a cleaner and better way to go, and it shows in earnest that we're trying to financially deal with the future of our parking issues in Paso.
Thank you. This is a joint workshop, and I have a hand raised from Commissioner Anshin.
Yes, I have a question. I don't know who made the motion, either you, Steve, or Councilman Garcia, but could you also include in that motion that we have the 30-minute short-term parking spaces at the end of each block face?
Yeah, I made that motion, and I could do that if I wanted to. Yes, thank you. Any other comments? We have a motion and a second. Commissioner Fitzpatrick.
Are we able to comment during?
Absolutely, joint workshop.
I agree with, again, I agree with everybody's thoughts and thought process, and I think that we do absolutely need to make this program be in the black. But until we have the enforcement and the people on the street to be able to actually enforce the program, all of this is kind of null and void, in my opinion. That said, I think that it would be great if we could look at this one fiscal year cycle as actually giving us the information that we're looking for to be able to base things off of these numbers. because we haven't been in a normal cycle, right, with COVID, with everything else. So it would be great, in my opinion, if even in 6 or 8 months from now, we revisited this. At that point, hopefully, being able to then see these other revenue streams and making adjustments as they would need to be made based on the other and additional options for revenue streams as well, I think makes a lot of sense to me. Then we would know how much we need to bring in from the parking program itself, as opposed to looking at other options as well.
Thank you. So, Mr. Gregory.
Yes, Steve.
Hang on, we have a siren running through town. We can't hear you. Okay, go for it.
That's how important my comment was. Here we go. Anyway, so I'd recommend to add that we revisit this in 6 months to your motion.
Yes.
That gives us the opportunity to make a change then.
And I am willing to add that to the motion. Will the second accept that?
Yes, sir.
Very good. So the motion is that we maintain the current program, including the senior parking program we've already approved. We direct staff to explore funding for a parking structure, which would include but not be restricted to TOT, tiered rates, a parking district, and a potential GO bond, and that this be reviewed in 6 months.
And
add to.
I'm sorry?
Add 30-minute short.
I didn't add that to the motion.
At the end of each one.
No.
I didn't add that to the motion.
Oh, I thought you said you.
No, I said I could if I wanted.
Oh, okay.
I have a motion and a second. If there's any further discussion. Roll call, please.
Mayor Martin?
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia?
Aye.
Councilmember Gregory?
No.
Councilmember Hammond?
No.
Councilmember Strong?
Yes. Motion passes 3-2. Thank you all. A very difficult subject, one of the most difficult ones we've dealt with, and it will be an ongoing discussion, which we'll be able to adjust as time goes on. Once again, thanks to the Parking Commission for all the work they've done and for all the people that were involved here today. Upcoming events: Senior Citizen Advisory Commission meeting Monday, April 11th, 1:30 p.m. Development Review Committee meeting Monday, April 11th, 3:30 p.m. Parks and Rec Advisory Committee meeting Monday, April 11th, 4:00 p.m. Planning Commission meeting Tuesday, April 12th, 6:30 p.m. Library Board meeting Thursday, April 14th, 9 a.m. Development Review Committee meeting Monday, April 18th, 3:30 p.m. City Council regular meeting Tuesday, April 19th, 6:30 p.m. If there's no further business, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I've got a motion by Councilman Strong, second by Councilman Hammond. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you all again for your hard work.